The other story we're following is the government shutdown isn't just affecting paychecks and services, it's also putting pressure on the real estate market. It has the National Flood Insurance Program frozen. That means that thousands of home sales across the state are stalled. In coastal communities along the West Coast in our viewing area, buyers and sellers are basically in limbo, unable to close in certain cases until this program is reauthorized. There's a lot of insecurity. Realtors warn that even a short delay could ripple through the housing market in several ways, slowing down construction, appraisals, and mortgage approvals. Meanwhile, take a look at this. New data shows that almost every Florida metro has a foreclosure rate that is higher than the national average. Lakeland and Winter Haven top the third quarter report by Adam Data. Inflation, high interest, and insurance rates, along with the economic uncertainty of our time, are listed as factors in this. Garrett, I'd like to start with you. When you hear this, for you it's not a surprise, but for a lot of us to hear that Lakeland in the entire country has the highest rate of foreclosure filings, that's kind of surprising.
It is, and it sounds very scary, and there are real price drops that are happening in certain communities across the country, and especially here in Florida. What we have to remember is we had an unprecedented level of demand during COVID. I mean, we had hundreds of thousands of people move here. I think I looked up recently, I think it was 2.5 or more million people have moved here in the last 5 years. I mean, Florida has a population of almost 24 million people now. And Lakeland specifically had a high number of speculators. So these people would come in, these were investors. I believe a lot of that data points to those speculators. They're trying to get out of their properties, and so you know, we have to understand that when you try to get out of a property and there's not enough demand to purchase it, you're going to see some of these foreclosures. But for the rest of the population, we have to remember the inflation on everything else, right? Insurance costs more money, construction costs more money. Anyone that owns a home knows, I mean, if you have to replace an air conditioner today, it costs significant, everything is more expensive, and so that's only exacerbated the issue with price escalations.
When you look at the data by that company and also by Realtor.com, they listed the 5 areas with the highest rate of foreclosure filings, and Lakeland was number 1. Then you had Columbia, South Carolina. Number 3 was Cape Coral, Florida. Then you had Cleveland, Ohio, and then coming in number 5 was Ocala. So what is it about Cape Coral and Ocala that you think landed them on that list?
When you look back at data from the 2008 crash, again, a lot of speculation. I think a large part of it was speculators who want to buy Florida real estate. I'll bring up an interesting point though. On the upper end, on the high end, luxury real estate, waterfront real estate, that's not slowing down. Those buyers typically don't have a mortgage. They usually watch the stock market more than mortgage rates. And so on the higher end, we're seeing a screaming market. We're having a huge success on waterfront properties, people moving here from the Northeast. That part of the market's not slowing down. So it's interesting you have these negative and positives in the same market.
And so Garrett mentioned the 2008 housing crash. What did Feeding Tampa Bay, were there lessons that were learned from that housing crash in terms of how that impacted workforce housing, affordable housing? How did that?
Well, I think when, you know, if you look at that as some might say, that was the bottom of our economic, right, floor. What we've seen since then, though, is a disproportionate, I think it speaks to what Garrett's talking about. Those with economic capability have seen their net worth, capacity, and capability rise dramatically. Those that ended up on the wrong side of all of those expenses have seen their expenses rise dramatically, and wages have not been, you know, grown commensurately with it. And I think that's the long-term challenge we're seeing get worse and worse. When you look at the folks that we serve, some 85% of the folks that seek services from our organization are employed. Remember, they're consumers, they're taxpayers, they're an important part of our community infrastructure, but their ability to maintain purchase power and for basic expenses, boy, that has just cratered as expenses have risen much more dramatically than wages have. So foreclosures in their world or maintaining household expenses far more difficult because you're dealing with more expensive housing costs, more expensive transportation costs, more expensive food costs, more expensive childcare costs, which is a hidden, sneaky, huge issue for a lot of families. And so trying to make all that work is really, really challenging, and people are making difficult decisions.
What is the trend when you all in the food industry are looking at these big stories on the housing market and what's happening? When do you start to feel those impacts or see those impacts on the food programs or the families that you serve directly?
So, you know, we could say we're a bellwether at the front and we're also an indicator of economic recovery on the back end, right? It could be both because when we look at something, it's never to a homeowner or to a person in this situation. It's not just a housing crisis or a food crisis, it is a life crisis. And so you're now trying to make trade-off choices. And I do want to mention one of the great concerns we have about healthcare is if healthcare opportunities are restricted or those resources go away, you're now talking about a significant new burden on a lot of families financially.
Rebecca, as a real estate reporter, how do you see all of this playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I know the data that we looked at before was about individual homeowners. I'm really curious to see how the commercial real estate market might be impacted. As Garrett mentioned before, during COVID, there was a ton of demand. A lot of these investors were able to come in and get a loan very cheap. Whereas individual homeowners usually have like a fixed rate mortgage, so your rate is staying the same. A lot of commercial investors will do a floating rate mortgage, so they could see their rates going up now. During that time, we had a lot of investors coming in here buying up older properties. They thought they could maybe flip for a profit and sell them before their mortgage rate went up. So I'm curious to see if that becomes an issue now, if people were not able to flip those quickly enough and they're seeing their loans come due.